What if the pressure became too much? What if, after months of being attacked and judged, Usha Vance couldn't take it anymore right in front of millions of people? The cameras were rolling, the whole country was watching, and then she stood up, tears in her eyes, and shocked everyone. J.D. Vance's wife, always calm and strong, did something no one expected. But why? What pushed her to this moment? Stay with us, because this story is just getting started. The build-up to the live TV breakdown. As soon as J.D. Vance became Donald Trump's running mate and became famous across the country, his wife Usha Vance was targeted. An experienced lawyer taking on the role of Second Lady should have been a historic event, but it turned into a never-ending battle against suspicion, attacks, and close scrutiny. Not only her position was being criticized, it was close to home. People who wanted to bring her down used every part of her life, from her job to her family history, as political fodder. The attack started out slowly, with snide comments buried in political forums and whispers that were passed off as rumors. After that, they got louder. People made fun of her and wondered if she really belonged in a government based on the America First philosophy. Others said she was involved and asked how someone from her background could support a party that had been accused of being racist for a long time. People were not only judging Usha Vance, they were also tearing her apart. Everyone looked at her every move, twisted them, and used them as an argument. She would be going too far if she spoke up. Ignoring him would make her look weak. Reporters looked closely at what she was wearing, how she looked, and even how she stood next to her husband. Critics used every event she went to as a chance to pick her apart. The news media made her seem mysterious, like she was stuck between two worlds, one foot in the political machine and the other in a never-ending fight to prove she deserved to be there. Bad things happened online. Anonymous accounts spread theories about why she did what she did. Bullies on social media spread false accusations about her, using her past as a political tool. She wasn't seen as a person by them. She was a figure of speech, an easy target in a cultural war that was getting worse. People were upset about her before they were outraged, and she quickly became one of the most divisive figures in the new government. No matter how loud it was, she kept her head up. At events, she smiled, stood tall next to her husband, and didn't get involved with the chaos. Inside, though, cracks were appearing. Pressure wasn't just about politics. It was also very personal. It wasn't just opposition she was up against. It was a slow but deliberate effort to erase her memory and make her nothing more than a controversy. It was more than just being second lady. It had to do with whether or not she could even be in that space. What happened next changed everything. It wasn't going on in the background. It wasn't in an email that got out or a political scandal. It happened in front of millions of people on live TV. The woman who had been continuously attacked and harshly criticized for months finally lost it. The calmness she had worked so hard to keep fell apart in an instant. The whole room got cold. The whole country looked on in shock. Everything fell apart right then. The question is what made her go too far. Whatever it was that she saw that made her finally speak up. You should keep watching, because this is only the beginning. The moment that shocked America. It was very quiet in the room. It was the kind of quiet that makes every breath feel heavy and stretches the distance between something usual and something that will change history. J.D. Vance sat on stage and gripped the table in front of him, putting his fingers into the wood. The bright lights above him gave him a steady glow, but something was breaking beneath that smooth surface. It had started out like any other night, planned, controlled, and regular. Now, though, it was nothing like that. An old woman in the crowd slowly got to her feet. She was weak but determined. Under the bright light, the metals on her jacket sparkled, and the microphone in her hand shook a little. She wasn't in politics. She wasn't a reporter. No one in that room could breathe when she spoke, though. Even though her speech wasn't very loud, it could be heard and cut through the air like a blade. The question itself wasn't what shook the event to its core. It was the weight of it. It was about something else. It wasn't about the future of America. It had to do with something more important than a campaign speech or a news release. As the words hit J.D. Vance, he blinked and his face got stiff. He was used to answering tough questions, protests, media storms, and being caught in the middle of political battles. But this wasn't like that. His jaw got tight, and his lips separated a little as if he were going to say something, but he never did. As he swallowed hard, his throat moved back and forth, and his chest rose and fell with each breath. In all of his years in politics, J.D. Vance never looked more lost than he did that day. The cameras got really close and caught every detail. His shoulders tensing up, his fingers curled into fists, and his short, weak breaths. The crowd wasn't moving. The reporters, who generally take notes or whisper to each other quickly, just sat there. There were pens on top of notepads. In the press area, news anchors leaned forward and gripped their earpieces as they tried to understand what was happening. There was a noise. A small change from the background that wasn't really noticed until Usha Vance got up. The action was small, but it had a big effect right away. A lot of people heard the whispers. People looked around. Things changed in the room's mood. Everyone looked at her. Her face was pale, and she was taking deep, steady breaths that made her chest rise and fall. But what really showed were her eyes. The months of close attention. The talk that goes on behind closed doors. Before she could even speak, the headlines tore her apart. The attacks on social media turned her into an issue before she had a chance to say what she stood for. It was all there, written in the honest feeling she had hid for so long. She didn't wipe her eyes when they got wet. She didn't straighten up. She did nothing but stand there. She just stared at her husband for a moment. He had been there for her through every storm, attack, and attempt to erase her from the story. After that, she moved. One step ahead, then another. The sound of her shoes hitting the floor was louder than it should have been. It seemed like the moment went on for too long. The woman reached for the mic. The air got tighter. All eyes were on them. People had spent months arguing about how much she was worth, watching her every move, and picking her apart. Now they were sitting there in quiet, because they had to listen for the first time. She held the microphone with one hand, and her fingers were white, but her voice didn't shake when she talked. That voice was raw, heavy, and full of something bigger than anger or tiredness. It told the truth. The truth about who she was, the truth about how much it cost her to be there, the truth about what it was like to live in a world that never really accepted her. She wasn't here to fight back. She didn't come to argue. She was here to clear things up. Every bad news story, mean statement, an attempt to erase her had worn her down. She tried to rise above it all, to block out the noise, and to tell herself that she was more than how they saw her. Though strong, nothing could prepare people for what it was like to be erased and judged over and over again. People had said she was a problem, a burden, and a distraction. It wasn't about what she had done. It wasn't about who she was. It had nothing to do with that. She was never meant to fit in here. They already knew what she was, no matter what she did or how quiet she was. It had been months of acting like the attacks didn't bother her. She kept her head up, smiled, and stood tall. There was nothing else she could do, though. She looked out at the crowd without anger or tears in her eyes. People in that room had talked about her, debated her, and made up their minds about who she was for months, but they had never listened. They had no choice but to listen to the truth now. Then she said what no one thought she would say. The room changed when she did. The country changed. Things would never be the same again. There were millions of people who kept refreshing their screens and wanting to know the truth. But the truth wasn't going to come out, yet. There was still more damage to come. As Usha Vance held on to the microphone, her fingers turned white and her breath was steady, but not steady. Everyone in the room held their breath. All eyes were on her, and every camera was zoomed in. Every moment was stretched out into something bigger than words. This was more than just a speech. It wasn't about politics. This woman looked like she was about to lose it. She had been under a lot of scrutiny for months. It was interesting to her to see how her identity and appearance became a point of contention. Every title, blog post, and news story turned her into someone she didn't want to be. An eye-catcher, a question mark, a trouble. She had been okay with it up until now. She opened her mouth, but there was silence for a moment. She wasn't thinking about it. She made a choice. She chose to speak up in a place where she was supposed to be quiet, deciding to say what was hidden behind the well-coiffed smiles and well-thought-out answers. It was quiet until her voice finally broke through. It was steady, but there was something raw and undeniable in it. She wasn't here to beg. It wasn't her job to explain herself. She was there to get them to pay attention. She talked about the constant pressure, the silent erasure, and the stifling truth of living in a place she was never meant to be. Though she had done a lot of good things and tried very hard to be careful, she was always seen as different. Political talk was not involved. It wasn't about rules. There was talk about how people already knew what they wanted to see and how she wasn't part of that picture. Her being there had become a political tool. Some saw her as a sign of conflict. For some, she was an annoyance, an extraneous detail in a story that needed to be consistent. The attacks were not just about what she did. They were about her very being. She had been judged, argued with, and thrown out, but she had never really been heard. She had kept quiet for months, acting like the hurtful things people said didn't hurt, and that she could keep going without letting it break her. But it did. Piece by piece, it had worn her down. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't asking to be accepted. What she said was true. No matter what she did, it would never be enough for people who wouldn't see her as anyone but a stranger. She clenched the microphone even more in her hands and shifted her weight forward. She wasn't shaking any longer. She was at a point where things had been building up for too long. She tried to rise above it all, to block out the noise, and to tell herself that she was more than how they saw her. However, the tiredness had set in too deeply. It was too hard to be alone now. Having to be in a place that didn't want her and asked her to be quiet was too much for her to handle. She finally let them see it now. She looked around the room. Do not get angry. Don't plead. Just the truth. They made up stories about her, watched every move she made, and saw her as someone to doubt, question, and even hurt. And yet, not a single one of them had ever really paid attention. The words that came next had not been yelled until now. They weren't very angry, but they changed the room's air. They changed everything. The whole country felt them because after she said them, things would never be the same again. The effects were felt right away. Everyone in the country went crazy when Usha Vance put her lapel pin on the table and said the words that no one saw coming. The White House was already under a lot of political pressure, so they worked quickly to get back in charge. There had been problems in the past for the government, but this was different. It wasn't just about bad policies or backlash from the people. The tone was private. Within minutes, there was an even bigger gap between the party groups. The story was quickly taken over by conservative media, which said it was a clear case of a woman being pushed to her limit by relentless leftist attacks. They made Usha look like a victim who had been pushed out of her job by a group that had never really accepted her. Headlines said things like, "The war on women by the left," and "Cancel culture claims another victim." People who write about politics saw it as a warning sign. If the media could tear apart the Second Lady of the United States, what chance did regular Americans have? The opposition media had a different view. They didn't care about Usha's problems. It had to do with chaos in Trump's government. They said it showed problems within the government and that the cracks in the president were getting bigger. They said Usha's decision to quit wasn't just a personal choice, but a sign that Trump and J.D. Vance had lost control of the White House. Some people said that Usha was forced to step down and that her decision wasn't just based on emotion but on logic. They even said that Trump's inner group might have planned it to avoid more trouble. J.D. Vance was caught in the middle of a political storm. He wasn't just vice president anymore. That was a man who had to stand up for both his wife and Trump at the same time. There was no way to be quiet. More rumors spread as the time he took to answer grew. Within hours, reporters were calling for a statement and waiting for an answer that would either put things back in order or set the government on fire. When he finally said something, it was well thought out. He stood strong by his wife's side and knew that she had been attacked over and over again. He talked about how strong and tough she was and how unfair it was that people on both sides had treated her. Besides that, he made one thing very clear. He was still loyal to Trump. He knew that the government had to put on a united front, no matter what was going on behind the scenes. Even though JD tried to keep things under control, the damage was already done. His words didn't do much to calm things down. There were a lot of theories, and people commented on every word, stop, and change in tone. Was he not letting go? Did he say more than he meant to? Some people thought that his calm response showed that there was tension in the government because his wife's resignation had caused major problems that could not be ignored. But at the same time, political planners saw a chance. Some people in the conservative movement gathered around Usha and used her resignation as a sign of defiance against what the mainstream media was saying. Others, though, were afraid that her leaving would weaken the government and give their opponents a chance to take advantage. Trump's supporters started saying different things. Some said Usha quit to protect her family from more attacks, while others said it was just a private choice that got blown out of proportion. During this time, millions of Americans fought on social media over what was true. Was Usha a victim of political warfare, or did she just understand what it means to work for a government that is always under attack? The internet was full of threads that looked at her tone of voice, body language, and last words. The moment of defeat was played over and over, edited, slowed down, and looked at from every angle. The White House knew they had to move quickly. There were emergency talks where people in charge tried to change the story before it got out of hand. What the government does next will show if this is just another political squabble or the start of something much bigger. One thing became clear after the dust settled. This wasn't going away. The damage had already been done, no matter what the government did to change the story. When Usha quit, it made a difference. Some people saw it as a break from the rules. For some, it meant the end of things. But what no one realized yet was that this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. What happened next would shake the administration even further. The breaking point didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a single event, a single story, or a single attack. It was a relentless buildup, a slow and methodical tearing down of a woman who had been put into one of the most scrutinized roles in America. From the time J.D. Vance was named Donald Trump's running mate, Usha Vance became a target. Her background, her work, and even her marriage were all dissected under a microscope. Politicians, media experts, and people who stir up trouble online made her presence a controversy. It wasn't about her skills or character anymore. Just having her there was a question mark. Every day that went by, the pressure got worse. Every time she went out in public, her enemies had a chance to pick her apart. There was a story behind every choice, no matter how small, that fit someone else's plans. She wasn't just being watched, she was being pushed into a part she hadn't asked for. Then there was the racial issue, which caused a lot of stress that many people didn't want to talk about but couldn't avoid. The question wasn't whether she was smart or not. People were wondering if America, especially Trump's supporters, were really ready for an Indian American second lady. It wasn't a quiet argument that happened behind closed doors. It was loud, never stopped, and hard to get away from. Some people thought she was too different to fit in with a government that put America first. Some people saw her as against the movement and wondered if she could really support policies that were long accused of putting minorities down. There was no way to win. Anyone who fully agreed with the government would be seen as guilty. People thought she was betraying them if she showed even the slightest sign of pain. Attacks weren't just from people who disagree with the political party. Hardline supporters of President Trump questioned her role in the White House and asked out loud if she was a weak spot in the administration's defense. A lot of people on online sites had ideas about whether or not she could be trusted and whether she was really one of them. The complaints from the outside and the pressure from inside were both very hard to handle. The media made things worse. There was a lot of talk about her mental health, her marriage, and whether she felt bad about coming into the spotlight from anonymous sources, political insiders, and self-proclaimed analysts. She was portrayed as a woman stuck between two worlds. The base she was meant to represent didn't fully accept her, and those who were against it thought very badly of her. She tried everything, but it wasn't enough. No words, actions, or appearances could change how angry I was getting towards her. She was aware that she could not win the fight. The pressure hit a boiling point in the last few weeks before she quit. What began as whispers turned into full-on threats. There were rumors that turned into requests. Would she give up? Was she going to pull away? Would she fight back? Usha Vance's resignation wasn't just another political controversy. It was a defining moment. The Second Lady of the United States had stepped away, not because of scandal, not because of personal failings, but because of the relentless pressure of being tied to one of the most polarizing administrations in modern history. The image of her removing her lapel pin, placing it on the table, and walking away would be replayed endlessly on television, social media, and political debates. But beyond the spectacle, the bigger question loomed. What did this mean for the future of the role, for J.D. Vance's political career, and for Trump's presidency itself? For decades, the role of the Second Lady had been largely ceremonial, a supportive figure, a silent partner, a presence in the background. But Usha's exit changed that. It forced the country to ask, should the Second Lady be just a symbol, or does she deserve more agency in the administration? Her departure sent shockwaves through Washington. Some saw it as a moment of empowerment, proof that women in politics didn't have to silently endure attacks, criticism, or expectations that felt impossible to meet. Others saw it as a failure, a sign of weakness, an inability to handle the realities of political life. But one thing was undeniable. Usha had made history, not for what she had done, but for what she had refused to tolerate. With her gone, the pressure shifted entirely onto J.D. Vance. Could his political career survive this? The vice president had always been a loyal soldier in Trump's movement, positioning himself as a fighter, someone willing to take the hits and keep going. But now, his wife had walked away in one of the most dramatic resignations in history, and that meant his leadership was now under scrutiny in ways he had never anticipated. To many, J.D. Vance had two choices: distance himself from the controversy or double down on his loyalty to Trump. But either move came with risks. If he distanced himself too much, it could make him look weak, unable to control his own household. If he remained unwavering in his support, it could backfire, making him appear indifferent to the struggles his own wife had endured. The political tightrope had never been thinner. Trump's silence on the matter was deafening. The former president, known for his outspoken nature and quick counterattacks, had yet to make a public statement. Was it a strategic decision? A sign of discontent within the administration? Or was this simply a problem he wanted to avoid altogether? His advisors were reportedly divided. Some believed ignoring Usha's resignation was the best move. The administration couldn't afford another scandal. Others worried that if they let this moment define the administration, it could set a dangerous precedent. If a figure as close to the presidency as the Second Lady couldn't survive the pressure, what did that say about the strength of the movement? And then there was the bigger question, the one that no one wanted to answer directly. Was this simply the price of being tied to Trump? The administration had already faced lawsuits, investigations, and public scrutiny. But this was different. This wasn't about legal battles or policy failures. This was about someone choosing to walk away because the weight of it all was too much. Usha Vance had no criminal allegations, no personal scandal, no ethical concerns. She simply didn't want to continue playing the role that had been forced upon her. And that, in itself, was damaging. Because if a woman like Usha Vance, a respected lawyer, a successful career woman, someone who should have thrived in the role, couldn't withstand the pressures of being associated with this administration, who could? It raised an uncomfortable truth. Was loyalty to Trump becoming too costly, even for those closest to power? For many in the political sphere, Usha's resignation wasn't just about her personal choice. It was a symbol of something larger, a crack forming in the foundation of the administration, a sign that not everyone could survive in the high-stakes, high-pressure environment that came with Trump's leadership. Some conservatives rushed to paint Usha's departure as a betrayal, questioning whether she had ever truly believed in the movement. Others saw her as a victim, pushed to her breaking point by a system that refused to accept her. On the other side, critics of Trump took the resignation as proof that the administration was fracturing from the inside. Her final act was a refusal to let the system define her. She wasn't going to be a political pawn, a silent supporter, or a figurehead in a role that offered her no real control. She had made a choice that many would never have had the courage to make. And yet, the fallout wasn't over. J.D. Vance still had to navigate the political minefield his wife's resignation had created. Trump's administration had to decide whether to acknowledge the moment or pretend it never happened. The media would continue analyzing every second of the resignation, every facial expression, every word spoken before and after the moment that changed everything. What happens next will change everything. Is this the beginning of a political storm? Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the next video popping up on your screen.